Welcome back to Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh on my Girls Rock Productions channel. In this episode, I'm going to talk about Brodie's Close and the Deacon Brodie's Tavern, Greyfriars Kirkyard, and the Edinburgh Vaults. We're going to start with the place whose residence ghost was a man who is also a suspect of being the inspiration of the character Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Brodie's Close and Deacon Brodie's Tavern. One of the most popular ghost stories out of Edinburgh is that of a man named William Brodie, who was a local figure that is believed to be one of the ones who would go on to inspire the character of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Now, Brodie's family was a respectable one, living in property on the Law Market section of the Royal Mile, where the lane they occupied still has their name today, Brodie's Close, and the pub across the road from the Close, Deacon Brodie's Tavern, is named for Brodie himself. Now, Brodie's father was a carpenter and undertaker, and William Brodie was a deacon of the guild and became a locksmith and cabinet maker of some renown. He would produce furniture for high society families. The writer Robert Louis Stevenson even inherited a desk from his own father that was made by William Brodie. A cabinet by Brodie himself is also on display in Writers' Museum, near to Deacon Brodie's Tavern. For all of this, his reputation was that of a fine, upstanding member of society by day. But by night, Brodie had an alternative life. Having recruited 3 unsavory figures from Edinburgh's underworld, Brodie embarked on a life of crime. Using his access to wealthy properties as a legitimate business, Brodie would take the opportunity to see what might have been worth stealing and then make a duplicate of the key to provide his men with easy access. Under the cover of darkness, his men would slip into these high-status houses and steal the specific pieces of jewelry or property that Brodie had identified as being of particular value. If those homeowners later contracted William Brodie to come and replace their locks, it could prove a very lucrative way of doing business. Now, there are various explanations for why the gang attempted a much larger job than usual. Gambling debts, one last job, and simple overambition are all speculated, but whatever the reason, this final job would end up being Brodie's downfall. The target of the job was Edinburgh's Custom House on the Royal Mile just past the World's End. This building on Chesil's Court was where the market traders making their way into the city would stop off to pay the tax and duty on the goods they planned to sell. Having broken in, the gang escaped with just £16 in cash, and then the next day 2 of the gang members were arrested. Now, Brodie feared the law would catch up with him, and he fled Scotland, seeking refuge in Amsterdam in the Netherlands. Through somewhat of a circuitous series of events, again subject of speculation, the Scots police intercepted a letter that Brodie had sent back to Edinburgh. Now they had an address for him and secured the right to hover and arrest him in Amsterdam. After his return to Edinburgh in August 1788, Brodie faced trial for masterminding this series of robberies and was found guilty and sentenced to death by hanging. An estimated 40,000 spectators turned out to witness the execution on October 1st, 1788, at the old toll booth on Royal Mile, outside of St. Giles Cathedral. He was buried in an unmarked grave at the Buccleuch Church on the Goose Dub. A number of local legends arose from this incident in Edinburgh. First, that Brodie had designed and built the gallows mechanism on which he was hanged, and he was the first man to actually be executed on it. Next, that he survived the execution through the use of a steel collar under his shirt and lived the rest of his life in exile in Paris. And lastly, that his wife discovered that Brodie had maintained not just one, but a second mistress by which he fathered 5 children. His spirit is said to haunt the area where his workshop and family home stood. Reports of William Brodie appearing in Brodie's Close persist today. Many who encounter his spirit claim that a demonic, fire-breathing horse accompanies him as he strolls along. Next, I'm going to talk about a spot that might just be the most haunted spot in all of Edinburgh, which is saying something. Greyfriars Kirkyard. While vibrant and beautiful, Edinburgh has a decidedly dark past. Some 4,000 Scots were falsely accused of witchcraft in the 16th and 17th centuries. To put this into perspective, less than 200 people were put on trial during the infamous Salem witch trials in Massachusetts. King James VI was particularly obsessed with witches. Side note, it's pretty safe to say that Shakespeare's Macbeth was written for him after he became King of England in 1603. Now, this obsession is what led to hundreds of Scottish people, mainly women, being tortured and executed. From Old Town's eerie narrow closes and alleys where the height of the buildings on either side block out the sunlight, to the chilling paranormal occupants of the world-famous Southbridge Vaults, which I'll be getting to shortly, Edinburgh has been described as Europe's most haunted capital city. Chock full of ghost stories, one of the most famous locations in the city is Greyfriars Kirkyard, said to be the most haunted cemetery in all of the world. Established during the reign of Mary, Queen of Scots, within a few years the cemetery had already been used for thousands of victims of the Black Plague of 1568. As soon as you enter the courtyard, which is Old Scottish word for churchyard, you will come face to face with a statue of one of the graveyard's least intimidating residents, Greyfriars Bobby. This little terrier is famous for faithfully guarding his owner's grave for 14 years until his own death in 1872. He is buried right inside the churchyard, close to the commemorative flower bed featuring a statue of him, and his grave is marked by a statue in gravestone. The grave of his owner, John Gray, where Bobby spent much of his time, is just down the path to the right. Sadly, they couldn't be reunited as animals are not allowed to be buried in the consecrated ground. To this day, people report hearing disembodied barking, and some even swear to see a small, ghostly dog running through the churchyard. Many of the tombs and gravestones in Greyfriars Kirkyard feature skulls and dancing skeletons. This sort of morbid imagery is known as memento mori, Latin for remember you will die. You might also notice hourglasses or wilting flowers. While the art style seems spooky to the modern eye, the intention was more philosophical, to remind those left behind that life is fleeting and that worldly vanities are not important. Continuing around the left side of the churchyard, look out for the mort cages, bars or cages built over graves to discourage body snatchers. Two of Edinburgh's most notorious notables, Burke and Hare, made a living out of selling fresh corpses to Robert Knox to use in his anatomy classes, while they turned to murder rather than grave robbing to keep up with the supply and demand. Others raided the churchyards for recent burials. Against the wall of the left-hand side of the churchyard is a burial place with reportedly the highest level of supernatural activity, the Black Tomb of Bloody Mackenzie. Said to be haunted by a vicious poltergeist. In 1677, King Charles II appointed his Lord Advocate George Mackenzie to prosecute the Presbyterian Covenanters, supporters of the Church of Scotland, who refused to subscribe to the Anglican Church. Over 1,000 men were imprisoned in Greyfriars Kirkyard, where hundreds died of exposure and malnutrition. Others were executed, and it was this cruelty that led to Bloody Mackenzie's nickname. You can still see where the Covenanters' prison was, in the top left corner of the cemetery, not far from Mackenzie's grand domed mausoleum. Since the 1990s, around 350 people have claimed to have been attacked by Mackenzie's furious spirit. The poltergeist activity massively increased in 1998 after a homeless man taking cover from bad weather meddled with one of the coffins in the tomb and got a real fright when the floor suddenly collapsed beneath him, sending him tumbling into the ancient plague pit below. Paranormal experts suspect that this is what disturbed the ghost of Mackenzie, leading to the spat of ghostly attacks. After some 350 people claim to have been scratched, bruised, pushed, and even bitten while viewing the tomb, an exorcist called Colin Grant was brought in to deal with the poltergeist. The bad vibes proved too much even for him, and he left the site almost immediately, only to die of a heart attack 2 weeks later. In 2004, two teens broke into the Black Tomb and stole Mackenzie's skull. They were caught by a ghost tour walking past. The skull was returned to the mausoleum, and since then the mausoleum has been locked up. You can still peek through the grate in front if you dare. Before you leave the churchyard, pay a visit into the Brodie watchtower next to the main entrance to check out its creepy collection of cursed dolls. And just a fun side note, if you are a Harry Potter fan like me, scattered along the right-hand side of the churchyard, you might recognize a few names amongst the gravestones. Names like Potter, McGonagall, Scrimgeour, Crookshanks, Moody, and one of the most photographed burial sites in Greyfriars Kirkyard, Tom Riddle. While J.K. Rowling never confirmed she took the characters' names from the cemetery, she did write much of Harry Potter novels in cafes in the vicinity. Now, for the last place I'm going to talk about in this video, I will take you to one of the most popular haunted sites in the entire city, the Edinburgh Vaults. The Edinburgh Vaults, also known as the Southbridge Vaults and the Blair Street Underground Vaults, are located on Blair Street in Edinburgh, at least today's entrance is. The construction of Southbridge started in 1785 when the 19 arches to support it were built. The vaults, chambers, and tunnels underneath it were walled in and sectioned off the descending levels. By 1788, the Southbridge was officially opened. Approximately 120 vaults or rooms were ready for use. The grand opening of the Southbridge and the Edinburgh Vaults was quite special. A rich elderly woman from Adams Square had followed the entire construction of the bridge and demanded to be the first to cross it. Her wish was granted because of her influential friends in high places, but just before the festive opening, the woman died. Anyway, she was the first one to cross the bridge after all, in her coffin. Many superstitious locals looked upon this as a bad omen. Above ground, the businesses on Southbridge were thriving. Most vaults were used as storage facilities, but as Edinburgh's population continued growing, the vaults unofficially became living quarters for the poorest of the poor. Although there is little evidence written of squatting, as most were squatting illegally, evidence was found in materials which were left behind. It's unbelievable that people actually lived in the damp, dark, and most likely very smelly Edinburgh Vaults. The conditions above ground weren't much better though. The city became overpopulated, the mortality rates were sky high, the lack of sanitation caused illnesses, and murders occurred quite often. Some murderers even used the vaults for hiding their victims, but corpses of those who died naturally were often stored here as well. The Edinburgh Vaults were not only used as living quarters for the poor, they were also a great place for criminal activities, including body snatching. Yes, freshly dug up corpses were hidden here until a buyer was found. The demand for corpses in those days were high. Criminals were paid £10 for each corpse, so it was a profitable business. The conditions in the vaults were ideal for storing corpses. They were fairly cool and had a constant temperature. It was also near the Cannon Gate and Greyfriars graveyards and near the local medical school. Locals feared these activities. The last thing you wanted was for your loved one to end up on a dissection table. The rich were able to place mort safes of iron bars and protect their dead. The poor could only pray that their loved ones were left alone. By 1860s, the conditions became so bad that most of the vaulted rooms were cleared. The chambers were filled with rubble to prevent flooding and also the squatters from returning. During World War II, some of the vaults were used as air raid shelters, but soon after the vaults were completely forgotten. That is until the 1980s, when a former rugby player, Norrie Rowan, became a property owner and builder in the Old Town. He rediscovered the vaults by accident. The rubble was cleared in most areas, and some were transformed into nightclubs, hospitality venues, and even a movie theater. But the part under Blair Street remained cleared and was eventually opened to the public. Since 1996, Merc Tours has organized ghost walks in this creepy underground city. The Edinburgh Vaults have been named Britain's most haunted place by the BBC. When you're down in the vaults, it's really not hard to imagine they're haunted, and some areas in the vaults are more haunted than others. The double-height room is one of the first stops inside the Edinburgh Vaults. The room has a high ceiling, probably due to a collapsing upper floor. It looks like it's two rooms that are stacked on top of each other. One tourist claimed to see a man resembling Abraham Lincoln in front of the top floor's door. This apparition is known as the Aristocrat, not to be confused with the Aristocats. He is a tall man with a top hat and beard. He's often seen in the double height room, but is also known to move into the tavern room. Dogs dislike this room. They bark, whimper, or simply refuse to enter. A bird-like apparition likes to swoop down, clawing at people below. The ghost of a naked man has been seen floating in the upstairs section of the room, close to the doorway. The temperature in the room shows dramatic changes, and the atmosphere can be menacing. As said before, the tavern room is also haunted by the Aristocrat. Psychics who tried to make contact with the spirit say his name is either Finian or Geraint Mackenzie. He is often seen leaning against the wall from where he watches people. He's grinning at them, but in a curious way, not a hostile way. He might have been a member of the Hellfire Club, not the Hellfire Club of Ireland, but a notorious gentleman's club inside the Edinburgh Vaults. This club was believed to have ties to the Dark Lord himself. People have seen a black mass moving along the ceiling, as well as an apparition of a dark figure that paces around the room. Sighs and screams are known to come from this room, and some people claim to have felt as if they were drunk. Some even appear to be drunk. They're unable to walk straight and suffer from extreme giggling. Reports of paranormal activity in the Niddry Street corridor have occurred since the tour started. A malevolent male spirit is said to house there. He's very territorial and occasionally shouts, "Get out!" He is a big man wearing a dirty blue overcoat. It looks as if he's holding something in his hand, which is most likely a knife. He obviously thinks he owns that part of the vaults. The room of the cobbler is another very active room that seems to be haunted by a very happy spirit. He's believed to have been a shoemaker from the late 1700s or early 1800s, and he still carries out his profession. He was first seen in 1997 in his usual southwest corner of the room. He's short, stocky, and bald, probably in his early 50s. He wears a leather apron on top of a white shirt. He's sitting on a bench while working on a shoe, and he really seems to enjoy the company. He's always smiling and laughing. The cobbler is very interested in people's footwear and is known to tug at shoelaces. He doesn't understand Velcro, though. He's puzzled over that one. He's such a strong and friendly spirit that psychics have advised the staff to go to the cobbler's room in case of paranormal trouble. He will protect people from malevolent spirits. However, another spirit inside the room is not friendly to everyone. Small stones have been thrown at visitors. They bounce up against the walls, and some visitors have even seen the stones being thrown across the room. Especially female visitors will feel grief, anger, and even experience abdominal pains in the northwest corner of the cobbler's room. These dark feelings are linked to a young woman completely dressed in black. She wears a veil as if she's grieving. Psychics have described her as being very disturbed. They think this woman has lost her child in a traumatic way. In the wine vaults, a little boy named Jack or James is often spotted, although he's able to wander through the entire area. Jack or James is believed to be between 6 to 8 years old, and he has blonde curly hair. He wears a blue suit with knickerbocker trousers and a white shirt. Jack likes to watch the visitors from the lower shelf, and he sometimes even moves around when there are groups. He really likes other children, and he loves holding hands with women, like he's looking for a mother-like figure. He likes to sing and is sometimes seen playing with a red ball. It's likely that Jack is afraid of a spirit known by the name of Mr. Boots. He is known to sometimes tug sharply on someone's sleeves or coat because he doesn't want that person to enter the Blair Street corridor. The boy sometimes hides inside the cobbler's room where he feels protected. The room of the caretaker is home to the ghost of a man often seen sitting by a fireplace. He seems really relaxed with his legs outstretched and a drink in his hand. A small, wiry-haired dog terrier-like dog sits at his feet. The dog tends to brush against people's legs, and he even sniffs at people. Its wagging tail sometimes is the only thing people will see. The vault's most active room is the White Room. This is the room where a very unpleasant spirit lurks. He is called Mr. Boots, but he's also known as the Watcher. He is a big man who wears knee-length leather boots. His footsteps are heard echoing throughout the vaults. He tends to sneak up on people. Some people even claim they can smell his bad breath. Mr. Boots walks around the entire underground city. People think he's also the same spirit that stalks the Nidri Street corridor. But he is particularly protective of the White Room. He doesn't want anyone in there. That concludes this week's episode of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh. I hope you enjoyed hearing about 3 more of the most haunted locations in this very historic city. Brodie's Close and Deacon Brodie's Tavern, Greyfriars Kirkyard, and the Edinburgh Vaults. Remember to like and subscribe to my Girls Rock Productions channel. While you're here, check out some of my other playlists. I do live covers and guitar lessons on my Stormi Teaches Music playlist. The covers are Mondays at 11 p.m. Eastern. Then I teach the song I covered on guitar Wednesdays at 11 p.m. Eastern. I also have started the Stormi Talks True Crime playlist, where I discuss some of the most notorious and sometimes controversial true crime cases. Those new videos are posted Thursdays at 6 p.m. Eastern. If you are ever in the Wilmington, North Carolina area, sign up for the Wilmington Ghosts Walking Tours or the Wilmington Spirits and Spirits Pub Crawl with U.S. Ghost Adventures. You can have me or one of our other talented tour guides show you around this historic downtown and hear some of the darkest stories this beautiful city on the beach has to offer. While you're visiting, if you decide you want to stay or buy a vacation home, check out my Moving to Coastal Carolina channel and contact me, as I am a licensed realtor in the southeastern North Carolina area. I'm going to go ahead and start the poll for next month's location. This will be back here in the U.S. Vote in the comments for either A, Chicago, Illinois, B, Charleston, South Carolina, C, New Orleans, Louisiana, or D, Salem, Massachusetts. Tune in next Tuesday at 6 p.m. Eastern for our next week's installment of Stormi Tells Ghost Stories Haunted Edinburgh. Until then, have a great week and be safe.